Thank you. Well, if you haven't gathered already, today is Peace Sunday. There is so much that encompasses peace. It is more than just nonviolence and non-retaliation. It is about our entire being and relationships. It is about justice. It is about welcoming. It is about belonging. And it is about practicing all of these things. I learned something in elementary school that has stuck with me ever since I heard this. And I feel like it came in the unlikeliest of places. It was in gym class in elementary school. I believe we were learning something about basketball. I suppose that doesn't matter. But what matters is what Mr. McGinty, the gym teacher, said. He said, raise your hand if you have heard the saying, practice makes perfect. And so we all raised our hands. We had heard that saying before. So everybody raised their hands. And then he says, which is what stood out, whoever told you that practice makes perfect lied to you. He had our attention. Aren't we supposed to practice? Why did we hear that so often if it's not true? But he said if you were trying to learn the alphabet and you practice them incorrectly, you would never perfect the alphabet. X, Y, B, D, A, N, F, J, O, S, K, and Q. You'll never get it right practicing like that. If you were learning how to ride a bike and every time you tried to ride a bicycle, you got on it backwards, you would never learn how to ride a bike, or at least not the correct way. So he was trying to get us that practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. In our text for today, it ends with a difficult statement. Be perfect, like your Father in heaven is perfect. Taken on its own, you'd be right to think, what? Are you kidding me? Be perfect like God is perfect? How can that be possible? God surely is perfect, but we are to be perfect. The command to be perfect in our context, there were some who questioned the authority of Jesus, and there were some who had an honest wondering about what it means to follow Jesus. Namely, what do we do with the law? What do we do with the Torah, the Old Testament? And it's a good question, and there were two obvious diametrically opposed resolutions to this question. One, that what we call the Old Testament law remains in full effect for Christians, for followers of Jesus. And two, that the new freedom in Christ cancels out the requirements of the law. Yet in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus rejects both, offering instead a third alternative. The law neither remains as it is, nor is it done away with. Rather, it is fulfilled and transformed in Jesus Christ. The law and the prophets, the Old Testament was pointing prophetically toward its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. So just a few verses before our text that was read today, Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. So therefore, we are to interpret the law and the prophets through the lens of Jesus Christ, lived out through Jesus Christ. The rest of our passage today is an antithesis. The final antithesis, there were several of them, and this is the last one. And they have one major requirement, a contrast in saying. You have heard that it has been said to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you to love your enemy and pray for those who are persecuting you. The contrast. You have heard this, but I tell you this. The law says this, but you have misconstructed the meaning of it. So I am perfecting the law. I'm fulfilling the law. I'm fulfilling the meaning for you. I remember one time when I was a child, it was a nice day out, and I was sitting in the basement playing Nintendo. And my dad came down and said, "It's a beautiful day. I don't want you to play any video games today." Of course, I knew what that meant, but as a crafty or sly or menacing child, I, knowing the meaning, decided to focus on the letter of it instead. So I obeyed the letter of my dad's command. No video games. So I went outside and for an hour or two, and then I came back inside, went to the basement and started watching television. There was only so much I could do with I had neighbors who were children, but none of them were home. There's only so much I could play by myself. And he said, "I told you to go outside." I said, "No, you told me not to play video games." Perhaps being too smart for my own good. So he said, "All right." He didn't say it like this, but I'm going to rephrase it to fit our text. He corrected me and said, "You have heard that it was said, don't play video games, but I tell you, go outside." So that I could not misunderstand the meaning. Jesus in the antitheses is addressing the problems of the people. The people had broken relationships with each other and with God. Restoring relationships is at the heart of the Sermon on the Mount and a major teaching of Jesus. Restoring human relationships after restoring the relationships with our God in heaven. The people following the law were getting it wrong due to their broken relationships with each other and with God. The Old Testament command for the love of neighbor, Leviticus 19:18. "You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." The people had heard that as love your neighbor, which is correct. But over time, they pontificated and on what else that could mean. Okay, I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but surely not everyone is my neighbor. So if I'm to love my neighbor, that must mean it is okay to hate other people who aren't my neighbor. As long as they aren't my neighbor, it must be okay to hate my enemy. There is always people looking for justification for violence, for wars, for separation. So it must mean it's okay to hate my enemies. But that is not what the command said, but that was how it was being lived out. Love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. So Jesus had to address this. You got it wrong. You are missing the point. You have heard this, but you are missing the purpose of the statement. So I will help you out. You have heard this, but I tell you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus is trying to restore our human relationships and our relationships with God. In Corinthians, the church was splitting and fracturing. There was quarreling, and Paul said, "Your fractured relationship is proof that you are not in fellowship with Christ." Often, I think there's a connection between our fractured human relationships and our fractured relationship with God or with Christ or with the Spirit. You have heard to love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I tell you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your God in heaven. There is a connection, becoming children of your God in heaven. It's not only about our right relationship with God, but with each other, so that you may become children of your God in heaven. I think it's words about describing growing or maturing or having a larger understanding. Jesus had mentioned he's not here, saying that he was here to fulfill the law. And he finishes this part with giving the ultimate example of our God in heaven. Another story of me in grade school. I'm really thinking about elementary school this week a lot, I guess. I had a really good friend, Nate. We lived near each other. We were on the same baseball teams, and we would hang out all the time. And one summer, Nate's mom decided that Nate and I needed to become friends with another child. I will call him Josh. Josh was new. Josh didn't have many friends. He was in our grade, and we were nice to him, but we weren't necessarily friends with him. So she decided we need to become friends with him. And our first excursion was a trip to the dunes, Lake Michigan, the Indiana Dunes State Park, which is where I lived nearby growing up. Nate's mom picked me up, and then we went to go pick up Josh, and she gave us a pep talk. She told Nate and I before we got there something along the lines of, I know that you aren't necessarily friends with Josh, but I expect you both to treat him like you treat each other. Nate and I were friends. We didn't have to be told how to treat each other. We had a lot of fun together, and we would play with each other often. She knew that we were friends and that we got along well, but she laid out the ground rules. Treat him like we treat each other. Sure, he may not be your friend per se, but you are not allowed to treat him differently. She didn't just mean be nice to him, but to include him, welcome him. He is not at the same place in your relationship with each other. Don't do inside jokes, or if you do, let him in on it. Maybe you've been in a situation like this as an adult. I have, where you're around a group of people who all know and love each other and have a history together. And when you're with that group, they treat you fine and cordial, but there's something different. It's not quite the same. They let you know that it's okay for you to be there, but in the conversations, it's hard to join in or to be treated similarly. Perhaps we Mennonites do that when we play the Mennonite game. It can be fun for long-time Mennonites, but newer Mennonites, it can be quite excluding and alienating. So we had gotten that pep talk from my friend Nate's mom, and I think we mostly succeeded. I'm sure we failed at times, but we got the point. It was a good lesson then, but I think it's also a good lesson now. Sorry, back to our text. Verses 45 through 47. So that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Here we get a little bit of the insight and the point of Jesus correcting how we interpret the law. Look at what God does. Doesn't God send the sun to both the good and the bad, the righteous and the unrighteous, the just and the unjust? Doesn't God send rain for everyone's crop? God does not discriminate on who receives God's love. So if you're going to call yourselves children of God in heaven, you have to act in the same way. Sure, it is easy to love those who love you. The most corrupt people in the world even do that. Doing that is no big deal. Doing that is simple. Do more. Love the stranger. Love those who do you harm. Love those who attack you. Love those who are mean and evil. It is not easy, but that is what is expected by those who truly receive God's love and acknowledge it. Peace is an all-encompassing act. The text is a call to do for strangers, and even those we disagree with and don't like, even those who do us harm, to treat them as we would our closest friends and family, to welcome and include, to stand up against injustice to them as well as our family, to be self-sacrificing, to treat all the same. And here is where we get the command to be perfect, like our God in heaven is perfect. It is I feel it is more of a statement of being complete. Be complete in your love. Be complete in how you treat not only those who you love, but everyone else as well. Be complete. Your God in heaven does not refrain from who receives good gifts. They are given to all. Treat the stranger no different than you would treat your mother. Treat your enemy no different than you would treat your best friend. Your God in heaven is perfect in who receives blessings. If you are children of God, you must do the same. This might not be completely focused on peace, but I believe that peace is so big that it does. And how we treat our enemies, people we disagree with, the people we dislike. You have heard that it has been said to love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you to love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. I would like to finish with how the Message says this verse. You are kingdom subjects, now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Amen.